The Cosmere can be a confusing place.
From allomancy to surge binding, there's a lot to look out for.
We're your hosts and escorts to the realms. I'm Griff.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the Silverlight Guide to the Cosmere.
Welcome back, bookworms. Today we have guest host Stormlightmemes. Welcome, Stormlightmemes. I forgot, do you prefer Stormlightmemes or your real name?
Stormlightmemes is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. You are a TikToker primarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making, if anybody could have not guessed it, Stormlight memes.
That's right. That is, I tried to make my name as accurate as possible.
That's good.
So that people knew what they were getting into when they were looking at my channel.
We probably should have taken a leaf out of that book. Silverlight Guide to the Cosmere. What's Silverlight? What's a guide?
What's a guide? Yes.
I've heard of this Cosmere thing
That is
before.
confusing.
Yeah. So today's episode, as you can tell by the title, Dear Bookworm, is we are going to review Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the fourth of the Stormlight Archive books. There are two novellas that we have yet to review. I know we have one of those slated to do with one of the guests from Dragonsteel Con last November. And the other one we'll do some other time. But first, we're going to go into some Sanderson news because that's what we do. That's what the guides part stands for. So last night, and we're recording this on a Saturday on March 30th. So if this isn't timely, it's not our fault. Last night, Sanderson hosted the live stream to end the Backer Kit campaign. If you are listening to this before April 30th, you still have the opportunity to go onto Backer Kit and select stuff to order.
Okay, so that ends at April 30th.
Yes, so it's doing that whole...
Fantastic.
Yeah,
okay.
It actually...
Yeah, this is good news.
I'm hoping...
There's a bunch of stuff I wanted to add, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to.
You
so
still should be able to.
That's actually good news. Yes, that's very good news.
Assuming this goes out tomorrow morning, which I make no promises, but I do hope. You will also... So the way the Backer Kit works is that if people are still backing it, it doesn't close. So at the moment, it's still open. Actually, let me check that because they have a set end date, and then if somebody backs it, they push it 10 minutes, and they keep pushing it.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay, they keep pushing it until that 10 minutes elapses without a backer.
Correct. Now they are going to. Sanderson said likely on Monday that they are going to end the campaign even if people are still backing it because you still have that month. So overnight they raised $500,000, so it's still going.
Wow.
Good Lord.
They are at $23,600,000, which is, I believe, something like 11 or 1,200% of their goal. So
Good heavens.
That's good Lord. I mean, I'm glad because this means that we will have plenty of money going into anything he decides to put out there. But, yeah, wow.
Yep. We're not going to mention the title of Secret Project 5 right here, right now. However, it is fairly clear that the Dragonsteel team is not hiding it. We're not doing the... don't know the title until it comes out. They have put it in their newsletter. It's out there. We'll do a review, a discussion on it soon. Keeping it behind.
Yes.
Spoiler-free title.
Spoiler warning
for now, but it is going to be delightful. So
I am very excited for it, knowing what it's about.
Indeed.
Yes.
What else do we have? We have Dragonsteel 2024. Registration opens in May 7th. So get those VIP ticket fingers ready because those are going to sell out probably within an hour.
Yeah.
I'm kind of debating about. I may set some money aside for a signed copy VIP ticket because this is one that I feel it is worth it. I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about Cytoverse, but this one I will definitely put the money towards.
Sure. Yeah. And then for those of you who can't attend Dragonsteel, their typical routine is that they will have signed books available for purchase from their website that they will ship after the con, non-numbered. So you just miss out on the number if you care about that. So usually, and then also they'll typically partner with, last time it was Barnes & Noble, to also offer signed copies. And if you don't care about signed copies, Stormlight 5 is coming out on a Saturday, which is going to be great. Not on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's like Brandon Sanderson is the only one who can say, hey, you know what? I know most books come out on Tuesday, but we're doing it a little different this time.
Yeah. Oh, and Audible news, the Secret Projects 1 through 4 should be coming to Audible very, very soon for you Audible fiends like me.
Awesome.
Yep.
Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
because, actually, I remember watching a video where he claimed that he finally closed discussions with Audible about upping the royalty rates that they offer to authors.
That's right. Yep. We're living in a better society because Sanderson exists in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we do.
Mm-hmm. And all right, I think that's it for Sanderson news. Shoo. Here we go. We're gonna keep the first little bit of this spoiler free. It'll probably take us about 10 minutes. Then I'll mark the spoilers. So if you're like, well, maybe I want to read Rhythm of War, maybe I don't. I'm gonna give this a little listen, see if they can convince me. This little part is for you. So, brief synopsis of the book. There's a Rick and Morty episode in the last season or the season before that, where they parody Die Hard. All right, and in part of that parody, the antagonist says that every culture eventually has Tower Man, which is what Die Hard is, which is what that episode is, and what this book is.
Yeah, I was about to say, actually, yeah, you are correct.
It is Tower Man. So this book is often a disappointment. And I don't know what to say to those people who think it is, because I think it's wonderful. We have, so I should have mentioned, we are definitely spoiling Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and Oathbringer. So we know that the Alethi and their allies have found the mystical tower of Urithiru, and Odium is like, I really want that tower. Chaos ensues. Tower Man ensues. And that's really the synopsis of the book. At the same time...
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah. Shallan and Adolin are like, well, maybe we need to go convince the Honor Spren to bond some more Radiance. And that's really, without getting into the meat of it, which we will later. Does anybody want to add anything? Griff?
I mean, there's also sorry.
I knew that was going to
go on. No, Stormlightmemes.
Stormlightmemes first. Stormlightmemes first.
Yes.
We also have some stuff going on with Dalinar and Yasna going off to fight a war.
Yes.
And the chaos that also ensues from that, and some pretty interesting, cool scenes.
Absolutely.
That's the only other major plot point,
right,
that happens in my memory.
Agreed. Griff?
I will say, for those who consider it a disappointment, I can understand why, because without going into spoilers, it's kind of a rough read. I wouldn't consider it a disappointment personally, but it is a little bit heavier, I think, than a few of the other books. So I could see why people may have considered it a disappointment because of that. I don't personally.
Right.
But I think maybe that's where their sentiment comes from.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and package that up with a little neat bow and talk about why it might be a more difficult read given the prose and the pacing and the subject matter. And I'll go ahead and start and say, if we take the Stormlight Archives as 3 or 4 books each, so by Rhythm of War, we've gone through 9 or 12 books, like standard books. After Oathbringer, which ends with a massive battle, you have to scale back. That was a major mid-arc climax, and you can't just keep going up. If you keep going up, you get Dan Brown's Red Rising, and I hate what that became because it didn't stop going up. So, set your expectations, Bookworm.
I have so many questions about your thoughts on Red Rising now, but okay, yeah.
Set your expectations that this is a significant departure from how Oathbringer feels in many ways. Not every way. And it definitely isn't a step back. It's just a step down in energy. And it also deals with some particularly dark material for Sanderson. Stormlightmemes, you want to talk about that and more of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you really captured it well in terms of just what we've experienced so far. Rhythm of War is quite different than the other 3 books in like even in terms of the scope, because the other 3 books just have so much broad coverage throughout the world of Roshar. You have a lot of exploration. You have a lot of seafaring, swashbuckling going on in different books. So you get to experience a lot more of the world of Roshar. And in this one, it's almost claustrophobic in feeling, because you are trapped. Like narratively, you are trapped in, outside of a couple of exceptions, it is confined to a very specific location. So I think even from a world building, for those who love the adventure aspect of Sanderson's writing, it is different. And so what's interesting to me is that from a personal perspective, I did enjoy Oathbringer, and I had just recently done my reread of Oathbringer. Even when it was going on afterwards, I told one of my friends, I was like, I have to take a break. I'm exhausted. So much happened in that book, and I feel overwhelmed because it was just so much. And I am, and while I do like Oathbringer, it is, of the 4, the Sanderlanche is top notch, but the book itself falls a little bit lower. It's still an absolutely amazing book, but because of how overwhelming all of the details and all the plot lines get, it does fall a little bit lower. So Rhythm of War for me was actually a nice, not a breath of fresh air, because it is so dark and it is so heavy. I enjoyed the change of pace and being able to focus and being able to, I like doing like a deep view of something rather than having like a lot going on that you get little smatterings of. And so having something that we are so focused on and invested in was more up my alley, even with the tone of it being so different. And we'll definitely, I'm excited to dive into that. It is still, like, for me, it's almost neck and neck with Words of Radiance for different reasons, but I am a huge fan of Rhythm of War.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Griff, what are your thoughts here?
I will say that I definitely enjoyed Rhythm of War. The middle of it does get a little rough, and of course I'll get deeper into my views on that when we get into the spoiler area. I will actually say I probably didn't actually enjoy it as much as Oathbringer personally. But I think that was also because, we had a character doing things that made me want to yell at them, and that was very frustrating to read. Again, we'll get into that in the spoiler area.
Yep, that is
a
theme of the book, and I'm going to.
I know, yes.
Yeah, I think.
And trust me, I am aware that it was intentionally written the way it was. That, however, it did not stop me from being irritated when reading those parts. So I think that lowered my enjoyment of it a little bit, as much as I realized that it was meant to be that way.
That makes sense.
But I still enjoyed it. I mean, yeah, but I still love the book, and I mean, anything Brandon Sanderson writes is top-notch quality. So, I did find it interesting that while Dalinar and Yasna were out fighting a war, for the most part, we didn't get a whole lot of detail about that. A lot of it was mostly a broad overview, and we found out about things after the fact rather than going through that, which I'm not even saying that was a negative thing. I just found it interesting because, like you were saying, I think that added to the claustrophobic feel, because even when we had things that were going on elsewhere, we didn't get any detail about that. It was still, oh, hey, this is something going on that you need to know about. Here's the basics. Okay, let's get back to the personal story of whichever chapter we're going towards.
Right. It all lends itself to that claustrophobia. It's wonderful. The Sanderlanche in this book is my favorite out of the four.
I was about to say that is probably the one thing that rose this book above any of the others. The Sanderlanche is absolutely top notch.
It is so good. It has such an excellent payoff for all of the muck that we were just dragged through. It is very satisfying.
It is. It really is. So we've given our thoughts and impressions about the book. So we'll do a quick rating out of 10, explaining our reasoning, and then we'll move into spoilers. So, Griff, you go first.
I mean, I'd probably put this in the 8.5 or a 9 out of 10. Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone, just because I don't know if they would be for the Stormlightmemes or Stormlight series. Good Lord, sorry.
That's okay.
As a whole.
Just plugging our guests more.
Right, yes. But, I mean, if they did... I mean, it's kind of a paradox, because if they've read the first one and they plan to continue, it's not like I can say, oh, definitely make sure you read Rhythm of War. Like, they're going to be reading it, but
some people...
It's still probably...
No, I'm kidding. Although you could change that viewpoint to on a reread. If people chose to skip it, how would you feel?
Oh, that would be a mistake. That would be a huge mistake. Yeah, no, this is on a reread. I mean, I still get a little annoyed at people who decide to skip Shallan's chapters in Way of Kings for a reread, because I think that despite it not being as action-packed as Kaladin's story, it's still hugely important to the entirety of the story, so...
Yep. All right, Stormlightmemes, what would you rate this out of 10?
Can I do, like, point? Like, X point X? Okay.
Sure.
So I would give it a 9.3. And like in comparison, Oathbringer gets like a 9.1.
Okay.
So it's just a smidge higher.
Okay.
Like I've mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of this one. But I also, the enjoyment is, like I have to kind of qualify that a little bit, because it is not necessarily a fun read. There are fun parts to it. There are things that we like, that the gripping action-packed, on the edge of your seat stuff happens a lot in this book, but from a levity, like there aren't as many of those breaks in like the comedic relief that we've gotten the benefit of in some other things. So it's not as like enjoyment is a difficult thing to say for this book, but it is one of the books that made me think the most. Yes. Like it is so thought-provoking. It is so deep in the concepts and the themes that it dives into. And so if you are enjoying it from a thought perspective and feeling perspective, then I would put it at 9.3, but exact like what you were saying in terms of like recommending it to people. In fact, my dad recently read this book, and I told him going in, I was like, just know it does get dark. So know about that ahead of time, brace yourself. And he enjoyed it. He absolutely loved this book, but I did have to kind of give him that little bit of just let you know it's a little different. Hang on to your hat. And
yeah, I think I would probably give that qualifier to anybody that was going into it that I knew is like, hey, prepare yourself for things to get a little dark before
before
the end,
very
because
bright.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stormlight.
And actually, there was something that happened because this book was published at the end of 2020. And I think that's kind of important to bring up because as we all were alive during that time, the world kind of ended before this was published. And so Sanderson even said during the time of publication, he said, like, you know, this gets pretty heavy, like, especially with people in isolation and a lot of mental health things that were really bubbling up because of the pandemic. The timing of it was just, on one hand, it was very timely, but on the other hand, it did really lean into those feelings that people were already experiencing from an isolation, from that kind of claustrophobia that I was talking about earlier. And so one of my friends, we talk about this all the time. They actually have another channel on TikTok and on Instagram. And so that's how we met, was because of our mutual love of this series. They were talking about how they don't skip this book during rereads, but it is difficult. And they have to be very careful when they're rereading it because of that very aspect.
Sure.
So, yeah.
That's interesting because, I didn't start into the Stormlight series until
2022.
What, 2021, 2022, somewhere around
2021.
Yeah. So I think that was interesting that I kind of skipped.
Sorry, 2022.
Okay, yeah, because I remember I started reading
2021.
Yeah, no, it was 2022.
No, it was 2021.
No, because
we've gone to 2 Dragonsteel cons, and we only knew about Dragonsteel con in 2022, right?
Right. Well, okay, hold on. When did we start this podcast?
We started that March 2 years ago. So happy 2-year anniversary to us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So then, I guess it had to have been 2021 because we read the Stormlight Archives long before we started the actual podcast. And I remember starting... So I must have started that. Okay, yeah, no, that would have been... I would have started reading the Stormlight Archives in, July of 2021? Yeah. So I didn't get to Rhythm of War until, I don't know, probably August, somewhere in August 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around, like late August, early September, somewhere around there. So I think that for the most part, and at that point, the pandemic was, I'm not going to say over by any means, but there were a lot of like restrictions that had been lifted and things like that. So I find it interesting that I didn't really experience that aspect of it because, Yeah, the only reason I started on the Stormlight Archives was because I had a job where I could listen to audiobooks. So I had, roughly 8 hours of uninterrupted listening, and something as, intimidating as the Stormlight Archives in length seemed to fit my new situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. Sorry, my headphones are dying, so I'm going to have to switch my audio for a second.
Oh no!
And then we can splice back in. I'm sorry, I don't need to add editing.
It's all good.
Hang on just a second.
We might not edit it at all.
Well, we'll give them that authentic improv feel.
When do we not? It's always.
I mean,
improv,
yeah, exactly.
Right? Wait. No, we have an outline. It's not completely improv.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect.
Oh
no. Oh, wait.
Hold on. I think I have a. Wait.
There's an echo.
There's an echo.
Oh no.
Oh no.
How about now?
Not as much. No. I think we're good. I think we're good. Yep. We're good.
Okay.
There's no more echo on my end. Okay.
No echo on my end.
Okay. Turns out there's a button on here that says echo cancellation, so I clicked that.
Nice. All right.
That probably helps.
Yeah.
Thanks, digital age. All right, I'm gonna give my rating real quick, and then we'll go into.
I'm sorry. Before you do, I'm so sorry.
Oh no.
I don't mean to delay you. But I did want to finish the note that I was going to say. That in Rhythm of War, at the end of the book, when Sanderson has his author's note, he actually talks about the impact of the pandemic on the publishing schedule and his consideration of some of the content in the book in light of the pandemic. And I usually skip over author's notes, but I was interested in this one because of the timing, and so. If you ever get a chance to, I think it's a really interesting thing from like a historical perspective too. So anyway, okay, there you go. Sorry.
That's good. No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. My rating of the book is ephemeral and nebulous. So I guess it's probably like an 8.8 to like a 9.5, depending on the chapter of the book.
Interesting.
Vacillates greatly, skewing towards the end of the book. More higher. That's the words. All right.
So wait, you said 8.8 to 9.5?
Yeah.
So in between there would be like a 9.2, right? Am I doing that math right?
Yep. You're doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
9.15.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we average it.
Some of the chapters are like a 7.
Huh?
I said some of the chapters are like a 7.
Yeah.
But yeah. 9.15, 9.2, 9. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
All right, we're going to go into spoilers, unless anybody has some last minute words for the spoiler people. Great.
I don't think so.
Spoilers. All right, here we are.
Nice.
I skip Venli chapters on rereads.
You do?
Oh, okay.
Yep, I skip Venli chapters on rereads.
Okay.
I found them difficult to get through the first time. In fact, pretty sure I didn't even read all of them the first time. I looked at the chapter summaries on Coppermind, and for the last few, just did not interest me. Now, the Venli viewpoints in the normal time, I don't skip those. The flashbacks,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I think Sanderson did a great job trying to get people to relate to the Parshendi as humans, even though they're alien to us. Didn't work for me, and that's okay. Mainly the flashback bits.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a complaint that I hear a lot online, and that is that Venli's flashbacks feel redundant
Mm-hmm.
because we already got a lot of that story from Eshonai's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand that. There are some elements of her flashbacks that give us a little bit more Cosmere knowledge as she interacts with like some characters who, like, one of them, I can't remember who she is in terms of World Hopper stuff, but she's the one who actually gave her the either the gem or something. My memory is bad on this one, but she actually approached Venli at one point, and she was the one who kind of spurred on all of this. Does that sound familiar?
Was it the Voidsbrand Ulim?
No, it was a lady, and she turned out to be a world hopper, and I cannot remember who it is. I might have to look it up on the side, because there was one of the flashbacks that I remember specifically about this. I'm going to look it up.
Okay, you look it up. You
Okay.
got this. We'll talk more
Yes.
about.
I will be. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I will be completely honest. Until you actually mentioned it, I had completely forgotten those chapters were in there.
The Venli
Yeah.
flashbacks?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Clearly, they did not make an impact on my reading of it.
I agree.
Which makes me feel bad, but like, yeah.
Yeah.
I think honestly they might have been better in a different book. I think they might have been more pertinent had they been included in. I'm not saying that like you should have increased another book's length with these Venli flashbacks. I just think that maybe in terms of what's going on in Rhythm of War, they weren't as pertinent to the story and the themes of the book as some of the other goings on.
I'm going to push back against that because
Okay.
there, in my mind, the more subjective argument I have is that there is no other book that those could go in that would make as much of an impact. But the strong argument I have is that given the themes of the book for common ground and freedom, there's no better book that those could have gone in given the Eshonai flashback at the very end of the book.
Fair.
So while I don't particularly enjoy them, that first read through mostly did give that impact at the very end that I think Sanderson was going for me. But on rereads, I do find them redundant. Did you happen to find the World Hopper?
I'm getting there. I think I was mixing up two different things.
Okay.
I think maybe Chris from the one from, I want to say Taldane.
Yeah.
That world hopper, I think she interacts with Venli at one point. Am I off my rocker?
I honestly don't remember. I know that she's the one writing the rules and everything at the end of every book.
Yeah.
And we see her in Mistborn: A Secret History.
Okay. Well, there was somebody, it's going to drive me crazy. There was somebody who she talks to during one of the I want to say the humans were talking to her. Like they were, it was one of the visits with the Alethi. And she went on a hill somewhere. Sorry, I know that this is not good content for a podcast
No,
of
it's
me trying
fine.
to churn through this.
It is fine.
Okay, let's see. You guys go ahead. Talk to a world hopper. Usually Reddit gives me some accent with. That's who it is.
Accent with?
Yes.
That's a...
And let's see.
Oh, she gives her a gemstone that contains Ulim.
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, I was not wrong. Axenwith is a world hopper. She's a ferrochemist, and she's the one who gives Venli the gemstone that contains Ulam.
What the hell?
I wasn't wrong. Yay! Sometimes my brain
Where
does
is she
good
originally
things.
from?
In
Hold on, where is she
damnation?
originally?
It says she's likely a Feruchemist. She's likely
Yes.
a Terrace woman because she has a large number of metal rings that serve as metal, or a large number of rings that serve as metal mines. She can easily learn and speak different languages. What? What?
Interesting.
Right? See, this
And
is
the-
what
the name makes
happens when you
sense.
skip over Venli's chapters is you miss stuff like this.
Wow.
I have a feeling I picked up on that in my initial reread, but it's been a couple of years, so
I definitely didn't.
Oh, can I ask real quick?
You can.
Because I've been making some assumptions in terms of like reading timeliness. When was the last time you guys read Rhythm of War, like the most recent read?
Full reread or just like...
Full reread.
that would be the first time I read it.
Okay.
I've been trying to get to a reread, and it was things have been getting in the
Okay.
way. So
This makes me feel good, though.
Right.
I want to let you know that.
So, quick sidebar. Can you actually learn things while you sleep? Because for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been falling asleep listening to the Rhythm of War.
Okay.
But I'll get like 15 minutes in and then fall asleep, and it will keep
Yeah.
going. And then typically, I'll just choose a chapter to start with.
Yeah.
So I have gotten little bits of information that I was like, oh yeah. Other than that, no, full reread. Well, the last part of the book I will reread. I'll listen to regularly. Everything else, nope.
Okay.
Here we are. I remember what it starts with, and the major plot points. So take a lot of this with a pinch of salt and a good dose of World Hopper, apparently.
Okay. This is great because I felt terrible going into the recording for the podcast because I kept meaning to reread Rhythm of War ahead of time. And I just did not get to it. I was finishing up my Oathbringer reread and then I felt exhausted.
Right.
And that was about 2 weeks ago. And then I jumped into some light reading to kind of as a palate cleanser. And I was like, okay, now it's time for Rhythm of War. I have not done a full read. Now, I've read Rhythm of War 3 times, but I haven't done a full reread since 2021.
Wow.
So, because it came out in 2020,
Right.
and I read it as soon as it came out. And then in 2021, here's a little bit of history. I can't remember if I've told you guys this or not. But in February of 2021, my daughter was born. And then 2 weeks after that, I live in Texas, and Snowvid happened.
Yes.
Yes.
I remember I remember Snowvid.
I remember playing a lot of Bloodborne during that week.
A lot of, oh, yes. Well, we lost power, and we had a newborn. We lost power for 3 days.
That's terrifying.
Ooh.
It was one of the most horrifying experiences. And I like now, anytime that the power flickers or like, not again, we're not doing this again.
I'm not becoming Tower Man in my own house.
That's
again.
right. And so what happened was we didn't have like a whole lot to do except just keep warm as much as possible. And we didn't have like electronics except for like low powered things. But I had the full Stormlight Archive downloaded on my phone on Audible as audio files. And so what I would do just to stay sane was like, during that entire time, I was just constantly listening to the Stormlight Archive. I had just finished Rhythm of War, like a month before that. And so I was like, looks like we're doing this again. And so I started my reread, and I got to Rhythm of War. Like, obviously that lasted like a few days, but I was already on that train, so I might as well continue. And so I started my reread end of February, and I was done with Rhythm of War end of March of that year. Like, I just blasted through it. Yeah. And then in like later on that year was when I started my TikTok channel. So I started that in June of 2021. And then I was like, you know what? If I'm going to be generating content about this, I should probably do another reread. And so the last time that I read Rhythm of War was the end of 2021. So it's been a hot minute.
Yep. Yeah.
So all of that to say that a lot of my memories and the things that we're going to talk about are based on things that I remember that like impacted me the most, and like emotionally speaking. And at the time, I had not read things like Warbreaker. I hadn't read Elantris. I had read all of Mistborn, so I could pick up some of those connecting threads, but I had not those. That was kind of it. Was Mistborn and Stormlight Archive. So there were things like with Vasher that Vasher was just really cool, and he did some cool stuff. Yeah. That was very confusing. And then, but I didn't have the context of Warbreaker to kind of back that up.
Sure.
So what about you guys? Had you already read the other stories before you read Rhythm of War?
Yes, I had actually gotten through the entire Cosmere before I started over time. Before I started on Rhythm of War, I had read Mistborn, the Mistborn trilogy, a long time ago, and then I had read, I believe it went in order of Elantris, then the Wax and Wane series, at least what we had of it at the time before the latest one, and then Warbreaker.
Yeah, I started with the
so you had done all of those before you went into Rhythm of War. Is that right?
Before I went into Stormlight Archives as a whole, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. And then what about you, Alex?
I read the Stormlight Archives and then immediately went to Mistborn. No, I think I may have read Warbreaker and then Mistborn and then Elantris. Don't remember, but I did read the Stormlight Archives first, or the Stormlight Archive first.
No.
And then during Warbreaker, I was like, wow, this guy, he sounds a lot like Thiel. He sounds like, yeah. And then
I really hope you used that voice specifically when you came to that.
No. But I did use it I used a very similar voice for design in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter as I read it to my wife the other night. So
nice.
Yep. Yeah, it was fun. It's a great choice for design, FYI.
Yeah. That is, now I can definitely piece that together.
Yeah. So, listener, take it with a pinch of salt and maybe a good fistful of chowta that we may not know what we're talking about.
Yeah, except for random things that I decide to remember, like accent words.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do plan to start a reread soon so that I am more refreshed when Stormlight 5 comes out.
I don't.
But
that is the tricky part. That's the tricky part, right? Because we're recording this at the beginning of the year, of the same year that the next book is coming out. So you have to time your reread very carefully, because if you reread it too soon, too early in the year, then there are things that are going to fall out of your brain when you get to that. But like, if I reread Rhythm of War now, do I just do a whole nother reread when we get closer? You know what? I wouldn't be upset about that.
Yeah, I would.
I feel like I'm. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say I feel like I'll probably be refreshed enough if I start now and end probably somewhere in like April or May. I think I'll have enough of that still in my brain for it to matter when it comes out at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I did with Alloy of Law, or not Alloy of Law,
The Lost Metal?
Lost
Yeah,
Metal.
the Lost Metal.
Yeah,
Much shorter books.
true.
They
true.
are shorter books.
I will simply look at the Cosmere Knots, Cosmere Connected video after Stormlight 5 comes out to find whatever I missed. Easy peasy.
So what I want to do, and I don't know, I have big aspirations, and my ability does not always match that. But what I want to do with my TikTok and Instagram channels is to create series of what you should know videos, just to like for people who don't have the time to reread, but they just want refreshers of like the main plot points that are pertinent to the Stormlight 5.
Would it be surprising to learn that as we've reviewed most of the Cosmere books, you could just point them to us?
That would not be surprising at all.
Not be surprising, right? So no, that sounds bite-sized chunks instead of 2-hour behemoths is more palatable.
Yeah. Like my ideal would just be like a minute dedicated to Way of Kings, a minute dedicated to, like, I know that is my pie in the sky. It is, like I said before, I have high aspirations and the reality does not always match that. But that would
what
be...
you should do it. So speaking of the Cosmere Knot, he just put out the Wellerman parody, right?
Yeah.
For the Everstorm. And it was pretty good. You could do the Stormlight Archive reviewed or recapped to We Didn't Start the Fire. And then
you say that, but remember I was talking about that friend of mine who's on TikTok and Instagram, who we talked about Rhythm of War quite a bit.
Oh boy.
They actually did that exact video already like 2 years ago. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, go ahead and plug them. Who are they?
So their handle is Reading Cosmere.
Okay.
And they're primarily on TikTok. I think they do have an Instagram account, but they're not very active on it.
Sure.
And they're also in a master's program right now. So their TikTok account has been not as active lately, but they do have some really good stuff in there, to include a rewriting and re-recording of We Didn't Start the Fire, where it's all about Roshar. It is fantastic.
Dang, such a good idea.
I'm sorry. It's a good idea. It really is.
I'm going to go ahead and put this into our listeners' ears before we move on to the rest of our outline, which is most of it because we haven't talked about the next part yet. My wife and I are working on something special for our podcast that not even Griff knows about. And
I don't.
It's going to be fantastic. Music related, timely, given Sanderson's live stream yesterday. So that's all I'll say about that. I'll turn the gas on a little bit for some future interesting content coming out of our channel. So characters. There's a lot of characters in the Rhythm of War. There's a lot of characters in the Stormlight Archive.
Yeah.
Let's talk about them because that's what's next on the outline.
I love it.
All right, let's shift gears, and it looks like what we should do is talk about Shallan and Adolin, and then we'll talk about Dalinar and Yasna, and then we'll talk about the rest of the group stuck in the tower, if everybody's okay with that. So Shallan and Adolin, the lovebirds. That are both murderers now.
Yeah. You know,
That's fine. They're all
Like you do.
murderers. It's
Power
all
couple.
good.
Power couple, right? You know,
Yeah, there you go.
who
girl
needs...
boss.
there's an interesting parallel there between them and Vin and Ellen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because of the like, you can tell that they're good people. That
Right.
you know, we're rooting for them,
Mhm.
but they very clearly have blood on their hands.
Yes.
And we don't hold that against them for the most part.
People typically do like gray characters
Mm-hmm.
more than stalwart bastions of goodness and or despicable evil.
Villains.
Yeah. And when they have a lot of charisma, we like them even more.
Right. And
Yeah.
they have charisma
Mm-hmm.
mostly. So they're part of this. So it says on the outline that we should discuss their motivations and their development. Shallan has a kind of undercurrent through the whole series where, yeah, book 2 had her flashbacks, but she's getting kind of big reveals in every book. Correct me if I'm wrong. Whereas someone like Kaladin, it's not every book that he's really... Like, we see him fail in Oathbringer to say the fourth ideal. Of course, in hindsight, he says it in Rhythm of War, and right, because he fails in the third, so he can succeed in the fourth. Shallan's kind of been going, oh, hey, big reveal right here in every book, right? So...
What was her big reveal in Oathbringer?
When did we learn that she killed her dad?
We learned that in Way of Kings, technically.
When did we learn that she
Because it
killed
was
her
at the
mom?
very end. That was like her big lie. Like they say, we need a lie and a truth. And she said, I killed my father,
Right.
I think.
Was that at the
We
beginning of
learn
Words of
about
Radiance?
her. Wait, what?
Was that the beginning of Words of Radiance or the end of Way of Kings?
I think it was at the end of Way of Kings. When she is about to transform the goblet at the end,
Yep.
and it becomes like the spool or like the blood,
Mm-hmm.
because she's trying to soulcast, and she needs to exchange a lie, like something that's a truth.
Mm-hmm.
No, she needs to give them a truth.
Mm-hmm.
And she says something like, I'm terrified. And they say, we need something stronger. And she says, I killed my father.
Right.
And
Right.
so that was when we learned about that.
Right. When was her mom? When did we learn that she killed her mom? In the flashbacks, right?
In the
Words
flashbacks
Radiance.
of Words of Radiance.
Cool. Oathbringer. She... Okay, maybe I'm counting... You know what? I'll stand by what I said. Taking out Beata Mishram was a more significant development for Shallan than what Kaladin did in Book 3.
That is fair. She does have big moments.
She has big moments.
I think that I think you're right in that she has very big development pieces in every book.
Yes.
Like the stuff with her personalities in book 3.
Right.
Those
Yes.
were very heavy. Even if we didn't learn anything new about her memories and her past, like her struggles with identity in the third book were very heavy. So I definitely agree. And yeah, Kaladin didn't really have a whole lot of oomph in Oathbringer. Like he didn't have like anything that he overcame necessarily.
Right.
He was at
Yeah.
that point, and then he failed.
We also had
Right. Yeah.
we also had development of Shallan in the terms of what romance Sanderson was trying to put in Oathbringer, with her choosing Adolin over Kaladin, which for me is not that big of a point, but again, combined with the other things she did, and her struggle with Yasna coming back, right? So there was a lot of development, and there continues to be development, even if it is in the form of a big reveal for Shallan. And that's not dissimilar in Rhythm of War, where we find Shallan had bonded a spren before she met Pattern. And she also had more development with her identities throughout the entire book. Given her struggle here was with truth and loyalty of her Pattern says friends, the other light weavers, right? Yeah. And Pattern's like, well, it was because somebody was spying on Hoyd. It wasn't because one of your friends is lying to you. And then after that, she gives up Radiant, right? She reabsorbs Radiant, but we still see.
Oh wait, I thought she reabsorbed. Was it Radiant or was it Veil?
It was Radiant.
Yeah, it was Radiant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We also got more of her fight with Formless, which she says isn't actually formless. She knows what it is, but we don't yet. And her story is tied in with Adolin heavily in this book. Griff, you wanna speak on that?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Shallan and Adolin. Adolin's development and plot are tied directly with Shallan in this book. Do you want to speak on that?
I don't remember it being tied to Shallan. I know that he went with her to what was the fortress called?
Lasting Integrity. That's really what I meant.
Yeah, Lasting Integrity. And I liked his development in that. I remember hers quite a bit more, of her being tasked with the Ghost Bloods to kill. Names are going to be escaping me for the most part.
Restories.
Yeah, Restories, and her eventually refusing the Ghost Bloods entirely. But I think somebody with a better memory than I is going to have to speak on Adolin's development.
All right, Stormlightmemes, go for it. Unless you don't want to either,
okay,
in which case I will. I just don't want to hog the mic.
Real quick, I do want to go back to something just because I was confused. And that was the Veil, Radiant, Shallan trifecta.
Yes.
Because I did go into the Coppermind and it said that Veil was reabsorbed into Shallan. Radiant remains with Shallan, but has plans to reabsorb.
Give me just one moment.
Dang, you're right. Well,
sorry.
You know what? I've jumped universes where that changed.
It's okay. Because so much happens with her and her personality, sometimes it feels like it's difficult to keep track of it. Because she even had the whole Formless thing going on, and I couldn't remember if she killed Formless or if there was there's a gap there with her. And so I wanted to double check just to see who's who and at the end of the book.
Right.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no, glad you clarified that because I was so certain. Anyways.
I know but there was something that happened, and I think one of the reasons why it comes up in conversations with viewers on my channel is people do wonder what's going to happen next with her, because Veil was such an incredible piece in her story. Especially at the very beginning with ELA and that distrust that sowed between Shallan, Veil, and Radiant.
Right.
They have that agreement of who's taking over when and doing things that the others agree with. And then they had they didn't want to kill ELA. And then and this one, I can't remember if it was Radiant or if it was Veil. I want to say it was Veil who poisoned.
I thought it was Radiant.
No, you're probably right.
Well,
this is the plot point where I get it a little mixed up. But one of them took over and killed ELA.
Right.
What? I'm sorry?
Oh, I said right.
And so without the others knowing, and so that sowed some distrust among all of them in one body. which gets confusing as it turns out. I'm sure it was confusing for Shallan as well.
Probably.
So, okay, sorry. But you are right in that Adolin's character development is very much tied to, like, he and Shallan have a lot of building moments as they are journeying together to lasting integrity, and then when they are there. Because
well, and Adolin's... Sorry, go on.
Adolin... What's interesting to me is that there is this constant theme of identity that happens in multiple characters. And I've seen it especially during rereads now where they're constantly talking about themselves as different people in their own timelines. Like Kaladin says that there was the boy, there was then the soldier, there was then the slave, and now there's the Knight Radiant. Dalinar talks about how there was like the brute, there was the warlord, there was the drunk, there was the madman, and then now there's him. And so, like, they have this constant theme of identity. And what's interesting to me with how that carries on with Shallan and Adolin is obviously Shallan has her own question of being different people at the same time, where Adolin has this question of who is he versus what do people want him to be, especially when it comes to Dalinar. Dalinar has a lot of expectation of what Adolin needs to be and should be. And Adolin is, especially in this, wrestling with, well, who am I really? Does that let my father down? And do I even care in light of what we now know about who Dalinar was? And so what's interesting to me is that in Oathbringer, Shallan has that question of who am I? And then at the end of the book, she even says, Adolin knows who I am. Adolin knows, and he's keeping her together. And then in Rhythm of War, it's almost like the reverse. Like Adolin doesn't quite know who he is in all of this. He's going to lasting integrity so that he can do something right. And Shallan has a lot of confidence in him. Shallan believes in him. Shallan knows that he can do what needs to be done. And she kind of supports him along the way. But I think that he has a lot of self-doubt in relation to, like, am I even the right person for this job? I am a murderer. I killed Sadeas. Do I really need to be going to lasting integrity for these honor spren? But Shallan is continuing to be that support for him, which I think is a nice role reversal. Especially when it comes to, like, she has that, there's a point where Mraize gives her an out of, like, killing the judge and then taking his place and, like, essentially being, securing Adolin's safety in all of this by determining, by, pretending to be the judge and then declaring him innocent. But she even makes the decision not to do that because she believes in Adolin. She doesn't think that he needs her to cheat, so to speak. She knows that he has that ability. She doesn't need to step in and rig the results because she knows that he's honorable. And so what's interesting to me in their relationship is that they have done, they've supported each other in identifying who they are and their level of worth to the rest of the world, even when they self-doubt, which I think is incredibly beautiful for a couple especially. So.
Wow. I don't think we need anything else on them, but Griff, do you have anything else? Unless you feel like you're just going to tarnish what she just said.
No. I was going to say that I think that the trial that Adolin has to go through in this book is fascinating because not only do we see that, not only do we get a little bit of indirectly the history of what happened with the initial Knights Radiant from the few words, and the Recreants. But I think I find it interesting that we kind of see Adolin I don't want to say he becomes a Knight Radiant on his own, because obviously he's not, but in his own way, he bonds with a Spren, which is the shard blade that he has, despite it being a dead shard blade.
Right.
And I think that kind of speaks to, because throughout this all, he's been the one person that has never become a Knight Radiant. Like we see Renarin become one, we see Dalinar become one, we've seen obviously Shallan and Kaladin, and he's been the one that has stayed just a person throughout all of this. And I don't know if I have a full-fledged idea or thought or theme behind that, but I do think that it's important that he was the one that was put on trial, not one of the other Knight Radiants.
I like that. Yeah, that's a really good point, in that he's essentially answering for the honorability of mankind, and he's not one of the Knights Radiant. That's a very good. That's a really good point. It's interesting because I think there are people who want him to become a Knight Radiant in the fandom. I actually like him not being one.
Same.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want him to become one. I have theories on what he would be if he did, but I don't want him to become a Knight Radiant. I want him to stay just a normal Alethi.
Well, the hot take here, before we move on to Dalinar and Yasna, the hot take is that Sanderson will figure out a way that the Night Watcher will be able to bring back dead Spren, but it will only be through bonding Adolin. That is able to happen because of Adolin's bond with Myelarin. That's my hot take.
So you think that Adolin is going to become the last bondsmith?
I do.
Oh, that would, wow.
It's a hot take.
I was wondering about that.
It's a hot take.
But it would be an interesting one, especially because that would mean that all three bondsmiths stay within the same family, so to speak. Because it'd be Navani, Dalinar, and then Adolin.
Right. Although by the time that happens, so I'm not suggesting this happens in book 5. I'm suggesting that this will happen in the second arc. And by that time, 2 more hot takes to keep the listeners on their toes. Hopefully not while they're driving. Stay seated. 2 more hot takes. 1, Dalinar will no longer be a bondsmith. He'll either be dead or dead. And then Navani will be exploring space as Urithiru is a spaceship.
Oh, interesting.
Sanderson has said Urithiru is not a spaceship. I think he is lying to us. That's the hot take.
That is
so there will be an opportunity for the Stormfather to bond another person. Yep. Okay. We could go down. You know what? We are going to go down a rabbit hole when we invite Stormlightmemes and Generic Entertainment on to theorize about Stormlight 5 sometime later this year.
Stoked.
It's going to be great. So on to...
Is this an official invitation for a future episode of predictions?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
that invitation was sent when we first reached out. Yeah. We said we'd like you to do Words of Radiance and then join us for Stormlight 5 theorizing with every other host, which ended up being you and Generic Entertainment twice each, which is probably for the best. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So yes, official. Absolutely. I've been thinking about trying to do bingo cards. I'm not sure how that would work, but I keep saying bingo cards and I can't get my mind off of it. Based off of what we say, and then make those available for the listeners, and then have a prize.
I love it.
But there may be something else we can do. Maybe we'll have a submission, and you can submit as many hot takes as you want, and whoever gets the most right wins something from us. I don't know. We'll see. We can talk about that.
We have options.
We have options. We have time, and we have options. Each day, both of those slip away. All right, Dalinar and Yasna. They're kind of intertwined in this book a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all that I really remember is that Yasna does some cool stuff and then makes Hoy do some funny stuff. And then Dalinar's like, I'm not Odium's champion. Please stop, Ishar. Please. Please? What?
Is this the one in which Yasna kills one of the other High Lords? Or is that an Oathbringer?
She kind of kills another High Lord.
Okay, or she challenges one to a duel, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
She challenges him to
Okay.
a duel. Well, Wit technically does. That was the harsher Wit moment.
Yep.
Where he keeps on
Right,
insulting
right.
him.
Right,
And then
yes.
she like stokes was it Ruthar?
I think so.
I think it was Ruthar. She baits him to the point where he
Yes.
challenges Wit to a duel.
Right.
And she
Right,
says, she essentially says something like, why not me? And he says that it would be beneath him to challenge a woman to a duel. And then she takes out her sword and stabs him in the throat. And then immediately has healing come in so that he doesn't die, but he does get thoroughly embarrassed.
Yes.
I love that scene.
And then, I love that scene. And I love seeing her on the battlefield because she summons her armor and then does some neat stuff with oil. And
She loves that oil trick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting during that scene because she even has like that kind of internal monologue about how it's not as glorious as she had expected. Like battle is so chaotic and it just never stops. And then she realizes that for as much as she was doing on the battlefield with all of her powers, she may have been making things worse because she was a target and everyone around her was then also a target. And so it's interesting to see with her perspective, like just kind of the self-doubt that goes into it. Like she's so confident when she's talking to the High Lords and they're in the tent and she's doing battle strategy and she's so confident. But when she's out on the battlefield and she's actually experiencing it, she realizes just how complex and how messy it is. And I think there's even a scene where she's talking to Dalinar about that. And he like respects her for having gone out there and experienced it for herself rather than staying behind and continuing to give orders and give direction. He respects her for having gone through that experience because it takes more leadership to be able to do that and live through it and still have the strength to lead. So I like that development between Yasna and Dalinar.
Yeah. We also see Yasna propose ending the monarchy. She's like, no, it's going to end after me, and we're going to do elections, if I remember correctly. Which I could maybe argue both ways if it's heavy-handed or not. Pushing us into the second arc, we'll definitely see that coming into fruition, and then like book 6 will be about partly about the implementation of a election system instead of a monarchy, because that's what Sanderson likes to do.
I could say that I could see Sanderson doing something really interesting, but I don't know whether or not he will. Because you see, I can actually say that there's a lot of parallel that could be drawn between what happens with the Alethi and American history, insofar as the brutality and the sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? Divine
Manifest Destiny?
Yeah, Manifest Destiny. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And everything like that. And so it could be, I could see an interesting parallel drawn between Alethkar moving into a democracy of sorts with elections and things like that, and a continuation of a parallel with American history. But I don't know if that's actually what he's going for. So
Could be.
Interesting.
We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Dalinar also makes his contract with Odium in this book after talking about it for like since Words of Radiance and so on. And Sanderson has laid out loopholes, and we can see the loopholes, but there's too many loopholes, so we don't know which loopholes are going to be loopholed.
Yeah.
So thanks for that,
Yeah, we don't know which. We also see the advent of Terravodium at the very end of this book.
We do.
Oh, that was incredible.
That was almost contrived, but too cool to say that it was actually contrived, in my opinion. Just because we've had Nightblood forever. If Nightblood had been a recent development, then it would have been, I need a plot device to let Taravangian take over the vessel of Odium. But we've had Nightblood forever, and we've seen what it can do, so it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Not as contrived. Good job, Sanderson.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I think it was well set up.
Yeah.
I do like during rereads seeing how the what is it? The diagram leads to that moment.
Right.
Like all of the little things that happen, even because things are rewritten and reinterpreted throughout the books, like the diagram when they're like putting their set pieces into place. It's interesting to see how it all leads up to that moment of Taravangian taking over and like outsmarting Odium. It to me, it has a very similar feel to how the prophecy happened in Mistborn. I'm not going to spoil an entire other series on this episode, but there are things that happen that feel very similar in terms of the set pieces and the use of predictions, and then even twisting them on their head to get to a certain outcome. I find it very smart and really cool to see it play out.
It's wonderful.
I also think it was interesting seeing Taravangian relying so much on the diagram. And then we see that Odium has an even larger one, apart from the whole dead space with Renarin, which is interesting in and of itself. But I think that all of this is foreshadowing of Taravangian becoming Odium, because we see him having a lesser version of something that Odium is already working with.
Yeah.
Right.
I also love Renarin with every fiber of my being. And the more that he shows up in these books, it just makes me so happy.
Renarin is great.
One reason is because I love the fact that he's an unknown. Like there's so much mystery around him as like what he's supposed to be doing for the plot, but we know that he's good. We know that we like love him and care about him because he's Renarin.
Right. But
every time that he is brought up in a prophecy, there's so much nebulousness about him, even for his own self. Like he has the self-doubt of like, am I even a Knight Radiant? If I bonded a corrupted Spren, did I do the right thing? Am I like, more of that is something that happens in Oathbringer, but I love the question mark that kind of surrounds Renarin, because it feels like all of the other characters, we at least have some sort of awareness of the part that they play in terms of leadership or support or what they're doing to drive the conflict forward. But Renarin is still so nebulous. And I can't wait to see what happens in the next book with him and the part that he plays moving forward. I think he's really cool.
It's going to be great.
Yes.
You know, it'd be interesting. And What this will probably go a lot more in depth in Stormlight 5, but I think it'd be interesting to see Renarin start his own faction of Knight something that isn't Knight Radiant that entirely composes people that are bonded with corrupted Spren.
That would be interesting. Do we have another corrupted Spren instance?
Not yet, but I remember that Renarin, or I think if I remember correctly, Renarin does talk about the fact that the corrupted Spren do want to bond people. Like they're not evil. They want to bond people. They want to form this connection. And so I could see that being a development that, even if not necessarily in Stormlight 5, possibly in Stormlight Series 2.
The back half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly,
That's interesting.
It'd also be interesting to see what, if anything, the powers are different when when someone bonds a corrupted Spren versus a true Spren. I don't know if
we know from words of Brandon that it does have they do seem to have access to a third surge, but that was Raphode. That was like you're theorizing in the right direction, Rapho, kind of thing. When somebody proposed that because Jean, not Odium, so on, that they have a third power, which in this case could be the prophesying portion of their abilities. We will find out eventually. Now it's time to talk about everybody's favorite tower people. So this book could have been called Kaladin Goes to Therapy / Kaladin Becomes the Therapist. And the book also could have been called Navani, What the Hell Are You Doing?
Yeah.
On subsequent listens, I have forgiven Navani a lot.
Yeah.
So that's nice. Kaladin goes to a really dark place.
Literally and figuratively.
And comes out the better for it. That is his development. If you haven't read the book yet, why are you listening to this?
Yeah,
First of
why are
all,
you still past the spoiler?
Second, I don't know if us going through what happens to Kaladin needs to be said. It's wonderful. It's deserved. He's our favorite sad boy, becoming sad no longer. Now Navani and Rabonio.
So I love and I hate these chapters in equal measure for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
I love them because of what they reveal in a hard fact about the Cosmere and the way that Stormlight works and Voidlight works and all of that works. Like it is probably the most exposition we have ever had on, hey, here's investiture and this is the way that it works and here's some interesting things you can do with it. At the same time, and I forgive her because I understand what she was going through. She was in a traumatic situation, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. This is probably the person that I wanted to most grab by the shoulders, shake, and scream, what the hell are you doing? Because she knows what is going on and she goes through it anyway. She's like, this is probably going to be used against me because she wants me to do research so that she has these tools available. And then she goes and does the research and hands Rabonio the tools that she's wanting. And I'm just like...
and it is probably something... Obviously, Sanderson did it intentionally. Gavilar says Navani is not a scholar.
Oh.
Right? And then in Rhythm of War, we see Navani call herself not a scholar. She simply is the patron of scholars.
Right.
And we know this is a lie. By the end of the book, I believe she even admits she is a scholar. So this is the book showing us her choices to continue on the path toward potential destruction in the name of science. Shows us that she is a scholar. And so it's forgiven in my book. It's worth it.
Yeah. I think the other part for me, and I don't know if I read into it or if I was giving her a little bit too much credit, but on rereads, I saw it as her also trying to outsmart Raboniel. Like, yes, she knew that she was essentially creating the path of destruction, but she was also trying to use that against Raboniel, like try to find a way, like, yes, I'm going to play along because I have to for the sake of saving my people. Like, if I don't play along, who knows what's going to happen? And then she was also like instructing her scribes to botch work along the way to try to slow things down and buy time. And so I think like the way that I interpreted it was that she was in survival mode, trying to do her best to keep everything together, and also trying and failing to use the research to find a way to turn it against Raboniel.
Right.
Like, and so on the one hand, I especially during the first read, I was very frustrated with Navani and how it felt like it was almost like an ego stoke for herself, like trying to play out this fantasy and this desire to be an engineer. And so on the one hand, it felt like that, but during rereads, it felt more like, no, she wasn't trying to, and maybe it was still part of it. She wasn't trying to live out a fantasy. She was trying to do the best that she could with what she had. But what I didn't like with Navani was how much she kept trying to like every time that she talked to Kaladin, it felt like she was giving him more tasks and relying so heavily on him. And I know like she could only like, that's kind of what she had to do.
Right.
But meanwhile, we see what Kaladin's going through.
Right.
And like the absolute like horror movie that he's living in. And then anytime he talks to Navani, she's like, did you do this yet? And I'm like, Navani, give him a break.
I will say you bring up an interesting point, and I think that that's something that needs to be looked at, is the fact that a lot of the time people who are abusive or manipulative will use the insecurities of the person that they are interacting with as a way to get them to trust them and rely on them. So I think that that could honestly be looked at very much as that Navani's insecurity about whether or not she's actually a scholar and her need to possibly prove to herself that she does actually have the intelligence to be one is something that Raboniel manipulates in their interactions to get her to do that work.
Oh, absolutely. She definitely, you're spot on. A lot of people like Raboniel, and I do to an extent, of the like likable villain because she has her own motivations. But I absolutely saw the same thing of any time that she was like, you say you're not a scholar, and then immediately like encourages Navani to do something, almost like playing into that, like, you can do this. We both know you can. And yeah, it was pretty schemy.
Yes.
So.
Very.
And I will say it does lead to one of the coolest things that Navani does in any of the books when bonding the
sibling.
The sibling, yeah.
Journey before destination, you bastard.
That's right.
Yep.
That was so cool.
Although I am curious about the tower spren being called the sibling. Because the sibling implies that there is a sibling to be a sibling too. Like you are never a sibling by yourself.
So I think it's a superficial reason, and the superficial reason is because two reasons. One of them superficial, the other is simple. Calling it the child is dumb. If we look,
what about the offspring?
Okay, the Offspring is a pretty good band. Probably copyright infringement. No, So correct me if I'm wrong. All of the spren that can bond are offshoots, or not offshoots. They are some combination of cultivation and honor, either 100% of one or a mix of the other. So the sibling being a single, right? It is a sibling to all of those spren. And then we look at Psalm for the Wild built, and there's a non-binary monk, and instead of being called brother or sister, they are called sibling. But I mean, I don't deny that it implies that there are more children, but I just think those other children are the spren that can bond.
Now, I may be wrong about this. My memory's foggy on this conversation, but I think that the Stormfather explains it to Dalinar when Dalinar's asking about bondsmiths, and Stormfather says, "My sister and my sibling," and he's talking about the Night Watcher, and he's talking about the Tower, the sibling. And so I think the familial connection there is Stormfather, Night Watcher, and sibling.
So the sibling is non-binary.
Right.
Right.
Because the sibling is the combination. You have honor, you have Stormfather equals honor, you have Night Watcher equals cultivation, and then Tower is the combination of the two, and then becomes the non-binary becomes a combination, and therefore it is the sibling. But I don't know if they have like a different name or if it is just the sibling. I would assume.
Yeah, on the Coppermine page, there is a third sibling. They are not with us.
Yeah, there we go.
So, I mean, you could just call it the Tower. The Tower Spren.
The Tower Spren. I think doesn't Navani a couple of times say the Tower Spren?
Or the Spren of the Tower or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
something along those lines. So,
yeah.
And we may get more on that. I mean, we will absolutely get more on that come book 5, because with Navani bonding the sibling, I think we're going to get a lot more information on them.
Yeah. It is interesting that that they. I have mixed feelings about Navani and the sibling bonding.
That's good. You should. Everybody should have mixed feelings about that.
Yes.
It felt so bullying of Navani to like back the sibling into the corner like that in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to live. Don't you, sibling?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Also, the setup that Sanderson has done to get to that moment, both with the Sleepless in Dawn Shard calling her the mother of machines, right? And the, I guess, not foil, but the other side of the coin for the sibling, which is that they wanted to bind Relaine, right? We saw that, and then it didn't happen. Sanderson, I think, may have been playing with an opportunity to subvert expectations for something interesting rather than something expected. And we're probably going to get some pretty cool revelations for the second arc because it was Navani and not Relaine.
I definitely think there's... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so I said there's definitely going to be, I think, some drama that comes out of the fact that they bonded under duress rather than at a moment where they were free to talk and discuss and make a
there could be
well thought out non-pressured decision.
But right after they bond and Navani does the thing where she vents the void light, and then she immediately recognizes what the sibling has done with the Fabrials to make Urithiru a habitable place, shows the reader and hopefully in Cosmere characters that even though they may have bonded out of duress, it wasn't a bad thing. In fact, it was probably a good thing. The sibling was genuinely surprised that Navani understood immediately what the Fabrials were, because earlier the sibling was like, this would take so many years to help you understand. It's like, well, that's what Navani's been doing for years.
Yeah.
It's Fabrial stuff. So
True.
maybe, so I do think that there's an opportunity for Sanderson to have in Cosmere characters discuss that they bonded under duress, especially a conversation between Dalinar, the Stormfather, Navani, and the sibling, and then Sanderson putting to rest those worries in very much the same way.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting too, because during the my reread where Dalinar bonds the Stormfather, it's in a kind of a similar sort of not situation, but it doesn't feel as mutual as other Spren bonds. So Dalinar like almost forces the Stormfather to accept the oath. Like he does convince him in a way, and it definitely wasn't under duress, but it certainly wasn't the same sort of bond that we see with Kaladin and Syl, and seeing that emotional bond as well with these other characters. It's interesting to see the bondsmiths, the two that we have so far, having different emotional levels with their Spren. And it makes me wonder if that is part of being a bondsmith, that there's more of a control aspect to it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Possibly. I do also find it interesting that it's in this book that we see, God, I'm going to draw a blank on her name. The one that becomes the Will Shaper.
Venli.
Yeah.
Venli. I think it's interesting that when she is trying to speak the oaths, it's cultivation that is answering, not the Stormfather.
It is.
And
I believe you. I do not remember.
I know that when she speaks, she tries to speak one of the oaths, and since she has not let Lift out of the prison yet, a female voice answers her saying, "Your oath is not accepted."
That is interesting.
And so I'm kind of curious as to where that is going, because clearly I'm not entirely sure what's all behind that. But I mean, obviously the Stormfather has answered everyone else about their oaths. But for some reason, and I don't know if it's because of the fact that Venli is a singer or because there's something between the Will Shapers and cultivation, but clearly she has, I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yeah, you're right that it was cultivation. So that's cool.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, because we also see that happen with Lift in a certain way with the Edge Dancers. I don't know if all of the Edge Dancers are, but we definitely know that Lift is tied to cultivation and the Night Watcher and becoming a Night Radiant. So I'm kind of curious if half of the Night Radiant ones are bonded through cultivation rather than through the Stormfather.
That is interesting. Because I had thought that the bondable Spren were like existing, like the bonds between, I guess the nail bond is what they call it, between the human and the Spren that gets you the Night Radiant. I thought that was all because of honor sacrifice. Like he splintered himself, and it was all because of that. But that does lead the question of, well, what about the others? What about cultivation? And then does that mean that we have some from the Night Watcher? because if you have some that come from, no, wait, that's not right. Because the Night Watcher belongs to, like, that's the cultivation, like, offshoot. So then
the Avatar.
I'm sorry?
I always kind of think of them as an avatar.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, like the Stormfather is an avatar of honor, and then Night Watcher is an avatar of cultivation, and then the sibling is avatar of both.
Sort of, yeah. With Tower Light and everything.
Yeah.
Which also brings up an interesting fact.
If you hear random thumping.
That was fun.
My son just thundered his way upstairs. So,
I do find it interesting that there's also a factor in that between Lift being able to use Lifelight and for some reason being able to touch their Spren, which is a whole other thing that I'm not entirely sure what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize cultivation and the Stormfather could recognize, like, acknowledge the oaths. Like, that's who was doing it. I mean, and then Dalinar at the end of Rhythm of War does it. Huh. Sorry.
Interesting.
Going way back. I wasn't paying attention to what y'all were saying. I apologize.
Oh, good.
No.
All right. We have talked about a lot of people. Let's move on because I think we'll touch on other people as we talk about the themes in a little bit. Let's talk about Kaladin and his dad real quick.
That could be its own podcast episode in itself.
That could be its own podcast.
Yeah.
That's true.
There's a lot of development there.
Yes.
A lot. And actually, that it plays into some of the plot, some of the themes. So maybe we should just jump to the themes.
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay. What?
I think that it might still be worth looking at least Kaladin and Lift as characters individually rather than just looking at the themes, because Lift plays a much larger role in this book, I think, than she has in any other.
If you want to expand on that, feel free.
Okay. I was just going to say that I think it's interesting that we see Lift do a lot of maturing in this book.
That's true.
Even though she is, in a way, still trying to hold on to her more immature viewpoints that she held in the previous books, I think we see her logicking through the fact that maybe she was holding these viewpoints as kind of a defense mechanism versus the way she grew up and the life that she had to live, and that they aren't necessarily the healthiest way. And I personally found her a much more tolerable character in this book than I feel that she was in previous books. And I know that I'm not alone in the viewpoint of the fact that Lift is found annoying. But I can also understand why Sanderson wrote her the way that he did.
Yes.
Even if I found it personally not the most entertaining character to follow.
Yeah, she has had time to digest the 10th pancake, which makes her more tolerable.
Yes.
So that's good. Anything else on Lift?
Well, I think it's interesting that for some reason, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because it has been a few years, but it seems like only her healing is tied to the Lifelight. She doesn't have access to her friction abilities.
Is that right?
I don't remember. I don't think so. Wait. No, you might be right. Because I do remember that she's able to get to the different radiants and then resurrect them.
Right.
But yeah, I don't remember her actually sliding and slicking anywhere.
And I think it's actually... I think it's specifically stated that while the Lifelight is giving her access to her healing, she doesn't have her...
Because the other surge is tied to... Well, that is interesting. because she doesn't inhale, like she doesn't use Stormlight. She only gets Lifelight through food, right?
Right, yeah. She only gets Lifelight through food, and she uses that to fuel both surges. But for some reason, and I think it's whatever's going on with the defense mechanisms on the tower is cutting her access to her friction surge, but she still has her healing one.
Yeah.
Which is...
Because that's tied to the Lifelight somehow.
Right.
Huh. Interesting.
I'm not sure entirely what that means, but I think it's significant. So,
yeah, that is worth noting and keeping an eye on for later. I'm sure that's going to play a part.
Yeah.
And then the one thing I want to bring up on Kaladin is, while it's through an unhealthy moment, we see one of the coolest things of Ruthless Kaladin when he goes up against the pursuer at the very, very end, right after Moash has driven him into a place of despair.
Yeah.
With pinning him up against the wall and then doing the attraction thing on his head, which...
And at that point,
that was intense.
He was being influenced heavily by Odium.
That's what I was wondering, because his eyes glowed orange.
Yellow. Yeah, yellow, and orange, red thing. Yeah.
And it's like I have questions about that, because I don't feel like that was ever addressed after that.
It sort of was.
No,
it sort of was. And the reason I say this is because I've just listened to this like last week as I was falling asleep.
Mm-hmm.
So when Kaladin does that, it's from Venli's point of view.
Right.
And she has seen Odium's golden light before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, his eyes were glowing with light that she's seen before, something like that, paraphrasing heavily here. And then the like chapter or portion of Dalinar's point of view after that is Dalinar... is it Dalinar with Odium?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And Odium mentions how he just lost another of his champions that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And when Kaladin is at the top of Urithiru, about to jump off to save, not the top, but about to jump off to try to save his father, actually what he's doing is contemplating suicide again, because Odium wants him, and he knows that, he feels it. So it's never directly addressed, but then we see it in three ways indirectly addressed. So straight up, that was Odium influencing Kaladin to be in passion, be enraged. For sure. I would bet my Sanderson collection on it. No, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's too expensive.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely does. And then it stands to reason, because right after that is when he does swear the fourth ideal. He saves his father. The slave brands go away because they're no longer part of his identity. It does stand to reason that drives away whatever influence had taken hold. There have been some theories bandied about that means that there's still some potential for future. I don't necessarily give credence to these. Please bear that in mind.
Sure.
But I have seen people lean on that moment and identify that might still have a thread later on. I disagree. I have my own predictions of what's going to happen with Kaladin. But it doesn't involve any of that.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to become Odium's champion. I think that's I think Oath or Rhythm of War absolutely put that to rest. So
yeah, I do. I have my own predictions of who's going to be Odium's champion. By the way, if you ever get a chance to talk to Chat GPT and get the AI prediction of what's going to happen, it is sometimes scary just how detailed those generated predictions can be.
Interesting.
Oh no.
Yes.
I mean, we can definitely discuss that on our theory crafting for Stormlight 5. So,
Absolutely.
Yep. All right,
but yeah,
what
those
is
are the only
next?
two things I wanted to mention.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll skip over part 3 because we've already talked about Teravangian becoming the vessel for Odium. We find out in the book that the listeners still exist, which was a major plot point for both Relaine and Venli. I did like their interactions during the Tower Man sequence.
Yeah.
And then we learned about the anti-light of all the types. But the reason mainly that we're skipping over this is because we have done 3 episodes already on the magic of the Stormlight Archive, one of which includes generic entertainment. So go check those out if you are wanting more on the world building and magic of Roshar. So let's dive into plot and themes because that's where we are. We've kind of already hit around the mark at a lot of the plot. So I think discussing the themes may be more fun and useful for the listeners. So let's not go in order that I have here. If you're looking at it, let's go from the bottom up because the top 2 are more interesting than the bottom 3. So let's talk about the theme of survival. We've already talked about Navani in survive mode, Kaladin pretty much in survival mode, Lift
Yes.
in a cage, Venli trying to get Lift out of the cage. They're all trying to survive. And in a broader scope, Dalinar is trying to survive what's coming in Stormlight 5. He's trying his best. What other... How else can we tie survival into the book?
Well, I think the siblings themselves are trying to survive.
True.
Yeah.
Because we have the sibling trying to keep secret the location of the what are they? The things holding the defense, the shield.
Yeah. The gems.
The things tied to the shield, and so
Nodes?
which
Is it
they're
nodes?
Yeah, the nodes.
yeah
Nodes.
yeah the nodes, and so trying to keep that secret, and then we find out that every time they reveal one, obviously the singers are listening, or is it Raboniel specifically who's listening in, or is it just
I think it's Raboniel.
one of the Raboniel is listening in, so every time the sibling reveals one, they now know where to look.
Yeah. I think also in terms of the war, the whole plot for Rhythm of War is the singers trying to survive. This is a major play for the tower that they feel like they need to take to survive. And in a more meta sense, that Raboniel, or what Raboniel talks about, right, which we've touched on, is that she wants the war to end regardless of how it ends.
Yeah.
Because if you're always in survival mode, you can't really grow, or, why would anybody want to be in survival mode the whole time?
Yeah. Yeah. There's one more thing that I don't think it's talked about very often, but it's the role that David plays in just the big reveal about him in the series, and the secret that he has kept up until this point, which has been a long time, and like his view of it being necessary. And sometimes I wonder, kind of in that the theme of survival, not necessarily to the extent of he thinks that he's not going to live, but the choice that he made to hide that, to keep it secret that he's not mute. He's able to talk. He's able to think. He's just slow. Is I think that's how they phrased it for him.
Right.
And so there's also a concept of like social survival, emotional survival, and doing what you can to fit in order to just do what you need to. And so, like, obviously he does a lot to help in literal survival. He works very hard with Verlaine, and he's very instrumental to Kaladin's survival. But even to the concept of, like, what choices people make in order, like, what do they hide from others in order to just keep going on? What did you guys think about the reveal of David and the role that he played?
I think it's him as a character in a setting like the Cosmere is a curious one to me. And the reason is I can't decide how Sanderson is going to play it out. That David as a character is a powerful character that, like you said, is often not talked about. And I can see Sanderson doing it well. What I think is going to happen, or could happen. Sorry, David having a disability because his brain lost oxygen when he was a baby can be healed with Stormlight if he bonded a Spren. I think Sanderson could do it tactfully and have that happen, and David becomes a normal person again. And it always comes to the top of my mind, the fact that I just used the word normal.
Right.
And how
I was going to kind of speak on that, actually.
Right. Because when, and I think it even ties into how Sanderson has said trans characters would work with enough investitures that their body would conform to their thoughts. Right. And he's actually
their identity.
Yes. Would conform to their identity. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the idea that, like I said, the word normal, David is somehow less than normal. Should we... It feels like an odd thing to talk about in society at this moment. It should, I think, personally, I think it should be a straightforward discussion. Somebody with a mental disability because of a physical thing that happened to them that could be fixed, should be fixed, if possible, right? Like, do you get what I'm saying? But
and it does go, especially in the themes of the book, what tends to be, and I think this is one of the ones that you even have in your outline, this idea of identity, of self, of who am I? Like, at the end of the day, regardless of what physical or mental or emotional defects or whatever you call it may happen, at the end of the day, who does somebody think that they are, and what is part of who they are? And like, a comparison is the fact that that Renarin is confirmed to be on the autism spectrum, and when he bonded the Spren, that didn't change, because it's not necessarily a defect. It's not like we wouldn't, in our society, the normalcy would say that he's neurodivergent, and so that indicates that it is divergent from a normal or atypical. But that didn't change, because it's not necessarily wrong. It's not like it, just because it is different from what the world would consider normal doesn't mean that it's wrong. And to him, his identity has not identified that to be unacceptable. And so it's still part of who he is. And I think that a similar thing could be said for David, because he has the reverse. He doesn't see himself that way. He doesn't want to be that way. That's not who he is. He knows that it was an injury that happened early in his life, and it became like he just had to move with it. He had to learn to cope with it. He had to survive with it. And so I think that there could be a very strong case to be made if Sanderson ever gets to this point where David bonds the Spren, that he identifies that that's not who he is. It's not necessarily that that is wrong, but that's not who he is and what he wants for his life. And if it was, then it would still remain, and he would still be in as part of that world the same way that he has been. But if he chooses, and we've already seen in the groundwork, especially in his POVs in Rhythm of War, that he knows that that's not who he is. Mm-hmm. He knows that he's more than that, but he just can't convey that in that same way to the people around him. And so the way that I kind of view it is not necessarily that the Stormlight fixes things. It doesn't really fix.
Right.
It connects. It connects a person's reality with their, and I think from a magic and realm perspective, who their soul identifies as. So back in, I think it's either cognitive or spiritual realm, something like that. When you make that connection, it connects all of those and makes the physical manifestation reflective of the truth at a soul level. And so I think that by phrasing it in that way and by approaching it in that way, you circumnavigate this idea of like, it's wrong, so it has to be fixed. Mm-hmm. It's not that. It is an alignment of reality.
Yeah, to actually expand on what you were saying, I think that that's absolutely right, because I think it ties, a lot into identity, like you were saying. I think that what somebody considers part of their identity is going to be what the Stormlight connects to. And in particular, when you talk about the soul level, I agree that I think that the Stormlight connects you to your spirit web. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that we see is that if somebody is hit with a shard blade and their limb dies, they can, if they are Night Radiant, or at least bonded to a Spren, they can push Stormlight into that limb and reconnect it, revivify it. And I think, like you said, that's connecting back to their spirit web, which is probably still whole. Mm-hmm. That's a little tricky, because we know that cracks in spirit web can come from both mental and physical trauma. Mm-hmm. So that's a little sticky there. But like you said, I think it really does tie back to identity. Does somebody consider that part of their true identity, or do they consider it something discordant with their identity? And the Stormlight is going to follow suit.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And so, like with David, I think that, yeah, if he bonds a Spren, I think he's going to find the Stormlight healing that in the same way that once Kaladin made peace with who he was and the progress he had done, the slave marks were healed away, even though they had never been before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think with David's actions during the fight in the market, where he steps in to protect Aiden, I think his name is the young one. He's certainly honorable enough, right, to swear first, if not second, ideals. So hopefully that'd be great to have a character show us that development, if that is where Sanderson is taking it. Let's talk about the theme of loneliness in Rhythm of War, because that is, for a large section of the book, prevalent But even before the tower is invaded, there is a large plot point for Kaladin on loneliness and depression and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So who wants to talk on that?
Well, I think
wants
it's
to take
interesting.
Griff
Very
wants
heavy.
to. Griff wants to.
I will take at least the start of it. One of the things that I think is interesting with Kaladin is that we see that in the time between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, he has apparently had a significant other that has that they have broken up.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And I think it's fascinating that we never see him specifically in a relationship with someone romantically. We have gotten stories of it before. We have gotten talks about people he was attracted to or whatever with his childhood and even currently, but we never see him in a relationship with a significant other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is important to this theme of loneliness insofar as we know he can form connections, but currently, as of Rhythm of War, while he may have connections with his family and things like that because he moves them into Urithiru and everything, he still does not have that kind of really, really deep personal connection with somebody he considers an equal.
Mm-hmm.
Because with his parents, you can have a good relationship with them, you can have a meaningful relationship with them, but there is always going to be that inherent authority that your parents have towards you.
Sure.
And that is always going to affect your relationship with them. And so I think it's kind of interesting that we never really see him, and all of the Bridge 4 and everything are...
I think it's interesting that you mention the obvious connections that he has, because there... I think the way that Sanderson approaches it is very empathetic, because he does identify that Kaladin does have friendships. He does have, at least to an extent, emotional and mental connections with the people around him. But there is still a barrier, because even when he is with people, there's still an emotional loneliness. There's still, even when he's with Adolin and Shallan and they're at the tavern, I don't know if they call it a tavern, a bar at least, and they're there together. And Adolin even says, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to interact with anybody. You don't have to smile. We just want you there. Kaladin is able to be there, and he's able to be present. Mm-hmm. But he's still mentally and emotionally alone, which I think is it's an apt distinction because of the, everything that Kaladin goes through. And I love how Sanderson paved the path even early on in the flashbacks in The Way of Kings, where Kaladin has this detachment from the people around him, even as a kid, and he addresses that and even says, at some point when he matured, this darkness came with him, and it identified, it doesn't call it out specifically as clinical depression by any means, because they don't have that kind of vocabulary, but it is very it's very evident to a lot of readers that it is clinical depression, that this is something that he wrestles with all throughout his life. And when you take somebody like that, you put them through the trauma of war, you put them through the absolute worst things that a person could go through, and he still survives. And he has all of these cracks. He has all of the survivor's guilt. He has the battle shock. He has the PTSD. And you compound all of that and you put that person into physical isolation in a tower where he has to, he has so much pressure on him to save everyone. I think that's one of the reasons why this book is so hard to read for people, is because of the emotional depth and the emotional strain that a primary character is going through. He's already been through so much, and it's we're watching him be pushed past the breaking point in every possible way. And just knowing,
And
especially for people who have struggled with and wrestled with depression, knowing what that's like, knowing even if it's not to the point of we have to save an entire tower of people, we know what it's like to be relied on and feeling like the failure is so much more of a weight on the person just because they already feel like they're falling apart emotionally. And so the idea of this, the loneliness, the isolation, the him, even in the context of saving the tower, he has people around him. He has David, Relaine, and at some point he has Lift. Even then, he still feels the pressure and the loneliness because only he can do this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you compound that with his already existing depression and everything else, it's just how much can one person take? And it's hard. It's hard to read. It's very, like when I was talking about earlier, how thought-provoking it is. It is not an enjoyable read, but it really does. It makes you think, and it makes you self-reflect, and even maybe to some extent empathize with people who are dealing with the weight of the world while also feeling incredibly emotionally fragile and alone. And all that while we were actually going through the end of the world in 2020.
Right.
So
yeah. I also think it's important that Sanderson shows that just because somebody is going through healing doesn't necessarily mean that that healing is just a switch that is flipped and people are fine from that point forward, because we see Kaladin slide backwards from all of the healing he has done from Way of Kings while he is trapped in the tower and, you know, being relied on to save everyone and still deal with the isolation that he has and everything like that. And I think that's really important because healing is a continual process that people have to maintain. And if the circumstances don't allow you to, that healing can definitely be undone. And I think it's important to show that fact. And I think Sanderson did it really well in this book.
I love that you pointed that out. I do. Because one thing that comes up in when people are criticizing not Words of Radiance. They never criticize Words of Radiance. What am I talking about? When people criticize Rhythm of War, they do. A lot of people that I've seen talk about Kaladin's depression. They talk about how it's just conveniently worse suddenly out of nowhere for the sake of the plot. And I try not to get angry. I try very hard not to get preachy. Because it is incredibly realistic in terms of exactly what you were saying. Like, healing is nonlinear. Healing, and even when it comes to something like chronic depression, it is, you're not necessarily healing because it doesn't ever fully get better. It's not something that it's not like a cut on the leg. You don't just, patch it up, do what you need to, put some antibiotics on it, and then someday it's like completely healed. That's not how mental health works. And I love how Sanderson does that with multiple characters. Like even with Dalinar in Oathbringer, how we see how he continues to cycle in his rage and his alcoholism. And we see that with Teft, where he identifies that, like, just because he has made a breakthrough doesn't mean that he's like over this addiction. He still has the addiction. It's still something that he's going to wrestle with. And so how it manifests with Kaladin is incredibly, yes, it does work in service of the plot, but it is not solely for the plot. The fact that it is done so realistically and so empathetically is one of my favorite parts about the book, because I feel like in so many fantasy books, especially when the overpowered, like super gung-ho protagonist is like just the bomb, and he's like constantly winning. And yeah, he might take some like hits and he might have to struggle through some things, but he's a go-getter, and he comes out of it like just the champion at the end. I love how this champion is not always okay. Like, I think that that's incredibly realistic for how people deal with, even in the midst of success, there's still that underlying hurt. And I love how Sanderson paints that in this story. And exactly what you were talking about, Griff, with the it's non-linear. It's going to be cyclical. Yeah. And yes, it's frustrating for us to read. It's frustrating for people to go through.
Right.
It's supposed to be. So.
Yeah, and it always reminds me of the phrase of to make good choices, you have to have good choices to make. And I think that really speaks to the fact of, I mean, a lot of the time, healing, treating depression, that kind of thing is continually making good choices rather than continuing the choices that you were making before that might have been self-destructive. But circumstances can leave you in a position where you don't have good choices to make. And I think that Kaladin is absolutely in that position in this book. He does not have the opportunity of making good choices. At least not the best choices that he could for his mental health.
Yeah. Like, he doesn't get a chance to say, no, I need to sit this out. I need to go focus on myself. I need a break. He doesn't get that chance. I love that quote.
Yeah.
I had never heard that until today, and I absolutely adore it. That is so true.
Good job, Griff.
Thank you.
Loneliness is also found sprinkled with a heavy hand throughout the book.
What is?
It's loneliness. Venli and Relaine, up until a point, believe that they are the last of the listeners, even not knowing that each other exists. I don't know if y'all have ever been in a situation where you feel like a minority. I imagine almost everybody has in their life. With taking into account white privilege and that there are still times where I felt like a minority for one reason or another. Not a great feeling. And so thinking about how Venli and Relaine act and develop, I expect they probably feel incredibly lonely. In fact, I think Venli is pretty outspoken about that. Luckily for them, they're not, right? They're not the last ones. We do find that. Navani is at some point cut off from her scholars, right? You mentioned she was giving them orders, and then pretty early on, Raboniel's like, can't have you doing that. So Navani is left alone for quite a lot of that, although she does have the sibling. Dalinar being the only bondsmith, right? Adolin not being a Radiant, tied to his identity. That probably feels lonely, so on and so forth. So it's not just one character is facing loneliness as a theme. It's that Rhythm of War is majorly tied to loneliness. But there are some bigger themes, I think, in the book that we should talk about, which lend themselves to some of the arguments we've made earlier, and we've talked about this: common ground, and freedom, and choice. I don't know why I said choice of freedom specifically. I think I read that somewhere. Choice, freedom, common ground. The book is heavy. The book is heavy. The book is setting us up for book 5. If we look at, like I said earlier, if we look at these as 3 books each or so on, we have a 3-book arc, and now we're going to have a 2-book arc inside the 5-book arc, in my opinion. So Sanderson chose to tackle some of these themes in that claustrophobic way. So Common Ground. This is what Navani and Raboniel's story is about, right? Raboniel more so than any of the other singers or fused. She wants the war to be ended regardless of who's on top. And Navani comes to understand why. Something that I meant to mention in Loneliness and forgot was that Raboniel, we see her daughter, right? And her daughter has lost her mind because they're so old. And so there's an inherent loneliness with being fused and being alive for thousands of years, losing your mind, becoming something you're not. And that's something Sanderson, that loss of function is something that Sanderson plays with throughout all of the Cosmere, with the characters that are thousands of years old. That's not new, but here we see a stark example of Darwin. Could you not? Thank you, Darwin. A stark example of how that plays in to a character's development with Raboniel. It also gives us an opportunity to see how ruthless and or logical Raboniel could be, which then makes Navani's actions at the end of the book even more bittersweet. Or maybe bittersweet's not the right word, but even more gray, in my opinion. Where else do we see common ground?
Well, I want to divest from common ground for just a moment to touch upon something you were bringing up before, and the fact that Sanderson really does touch upon this thing of living a long life can have detrimental effects, because not only do we see this with Raboniel's child, but we see it with the other heralds as well. Yes. Each of them, during their incredibly long life, has basically devolved into their own form of insanity. And I think that, and this may be an overarching thing for the Stormlight Archive as a whole, but I think Sanderson is trying to point out the fact that this conflict has not been good for anyone on either side. The complete cyclical thing of the heralds living forever and the fused living forever and things like that is, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to touch on here, but I think it's definitely an indicator that this Roshar being cut off and this whole cyclical timeline of the fuse coming, the Voidbringers coming back, waging war on the people, and then being defeated by the Knights Radiant, and then society starting all over again is, I mean, I think he's basically pointing to the fact that this needs to end. I mean, Raboniel actually brings that up, is like, this war needs to end in some form or fashion. And I think that goes for the war as a whole, not just this personal one that they're dealing with at the moment.
Right. Certainly.
Yeah.
As for common ground, sorry, go on.
There was, so there is kind of a common ground piece also found with the heralds, in the form of enduring lasting integrity, because the judge turns out to be the herald. Cannot remember. Is it oh, man.
Pretty sure it's Kalak.
Yes, you're right. It is Kalak. Kalak.
Kalak.
Yeah, Cal.
Something.
It's that guy. K.
Kalak.
So it's interesting because he seems like the most intact mentally, as we go through the lasting integrity piece. But they have to come to he ends up kind of teaming with Shallan and Adolin in the end, right? Like, if I'm remembering correctly, they choose not to kill him.
Right.
She tells him about the plot to end his life with the knife.
Right.
And so that kind of brings him to their side in a way. So even they're almost like reluctant partners because they technically kind of saved his life by not killing him when they could have.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And so there is a bit of common ground also to be found, speaking of lasting integrity, with what they're trying to do with establishing a connection with the honor sprint again, and identifying that whole trial is identifying that weird murky ground known as honor, and what is forgivable, what is considered worthy of partnering with again, of reestablishing that connection. And then realizing, of course, with the big reveal of we chose, like this wasn't some failing on the part of the humans. It was a mutual decision come to by both of them. And then also the fact that the Spren are doing some very shady things in lasting integrity, showing that they also lack honor and in a lot of regards. And so it's interesting to see that commonality that is paved through the course of a very frustrating trial to read.
Very.
Poor Adolin. Yeah, I felt.
Yeah, Adolin has a really rough time through the book.
Yeah,
He does.
yeah.
I would say there's also some common ground between Dalinar and Yasna, even in the few scenes we have of them, because Dalinar has already gone through this thing of being a monarch or I guess the brother of a monarch, and being a general in wartime, and having to fight a fight that you don't necessarily want to. And I think we see Yasna, because she's now queen, because Dalinar has taken over the Knights Radiant. I think we see her having to come to the same realization that war is, like you said, like the fact that she realizes that war, or the battle, is not glorious, that the battle is chaotic, and going out there can paint a target on your back and things like that. And I think we see Yasna coming to the fact that sometimes being a monarch means being, or making choices that do not necessarily reflect your internal ideal for the sake of your people.
Yeah,
Good point.
very true.
What else is there in themes before we move to criticisms and final thoughts? Anything else?
I think
I don't think so.
We touched on the big ones.
I think we've touched on the big ones too, and of course, there's many themes we could pull up, but let's move on. It has been almost 2.5 hours. If we go over 2 hours and 38 minutes, we will beat our Words of Radiance record. So we should keep.
Is that the one that I was on?
Yep.
I'm glad to be the connecting theme for length of time.
Yeah, I think Generic Entertainments, we ended around 2 hours. Yep.
Okay. I have a lot of things to say.
You have a lot of things to say about what?
Everything.
Things in general, apparently.
Yeah.
If these 2 episodes are significantly long, and I'm the connecting thread of both of them, I don't know if that means I've been talking way too much.
Nope. Can't be way too much. All right. So criticisms or issues with the book. Anything come to mind, Griff? Stormlight memes?
I don't.
Just kidding, Griff.
No, it's fine. I don't know if there are any specific criticisms I would bring up. I would say that personally, some of these things I found hard to read, even though they were intentionally put in there to be so. And I understand the point of them. That doesn't necessarily mean, but I also don't think I'm alone in that. And I think that a lot of those were included for a very good reason, because this is supposed to be a heavy and dark books. So I think I will say that maybe the only criticism I would have is that while it is important, I feel that Kaladin's time in the tower and the darkness he goes through is drawn out maybe a little long, and I might have cut it a little bit shorter, because I feel like the point is driven home early enough that maybe some of the darkness he goes through could have been cut short a little bit.
Okay.
But apart from that, I think that might be the only even half-hearted criticism I have of the book.
Sure. Stormlightmemes?
I just want to know where the heck Xyle was. He was in that one scene with the scarves, and then he never showed up for the Battle of the Tower. We never see him again. And I want to know what happened to him.
Have you considered asking Sanderson that?
He has been asked, and he said that he did have a scene that explained what happened to Xyle and where he was and what he chose to do. And for length, they had to cut that. But he never explained what that was. And that frustrates me.
Xyle flew away on the wings of scarves he made out of breath.
That's right. Like, apparently there were a couple of interludes with him where he left for his own sort of adventure, apparently, and he had to cut those. And I'm baffled. I just want to know.
We'll get that. I'm hoping we'll get that as a short story that takes place between Rhythm of War and Winds and Truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also want, because we have that year-long gap between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War.
Right.
Did Azure ever catch up with Xyle? We don't know. We don't know if they ever met up with each other and settled things. We don't know. Where did Azure go? Did she ever make it to Urithiru? Was she trying to get to Urithiru? I have questions. So.
That's a good question.
I would love to see Azure come back again.
Yes, she's so cool.
And I would love to know what's up with her sword, because clearly it is a breath-infused one in the vein of Nightblood, insofar as it is a magically created weapon. But I want to know what properties it has.
I bet we're going to see that. I bet we're going to see that with Dan Wells and Isaac Stewart's Nightblood. That's what's going to happen.
Because, yeah.
Yeah. Thinking on it, I don't really have any criticisms of the book, beyond the ones that you've both stated. I just have really low expectations for everything, so it was just pleasant. No, it wasn't that pleasant. It was very dark. It was pretty rough to get through, but got through it. Although I guess I do skip flashback chapters when I reread it, so
yeah.
I also want to know who the heck L is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions, and
There are.
I really hope he answers most of them in Stormlight 5. Like, he can leave a few big ones for the second arc, but
yeah.
Can we just get a lot of answers here? Hopefully we will, because he doesn't have to beat around the bush with Cosmere connections.
Yep.
So.
No, that's been gloves off, as we said.
Yeah. But especially with regard to Sunlit Man, there are a lot of questions we have.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I am very nervous.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
It'll be
nuts.
interesting. I wonder if that's going to be touched on in Stormlight 5.
It
It has
freaking
to be.
better. Yeah, if Sunlit,
Well, I mean,
he wants.
we don't know quite where in the timeline Sunlit Man falls.
But we don't need to raise the issue that it has questions that need answered because he specifically designed it to be read between Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
He has said it is meant to be read there. Which
Interesting. Okay.
he probably plays on the psychological effect that we've talked about a lot on the podcast before, where people who know the ending typically enjoy the work of media more than those who go in blind. Even though it's not by a lot, they're more likely to enjoy it. So setting up what we see with the Sunlit Man, that is what I expect he's doing. He's like, well, if they get a little bit of taste of it here, then more people are going to like Wind and Truth and what I do with it. So that's just my pet theory. So final thoughts and impressions of the book. Stormlight Memes.
It is pretty much the same thoughts that I had at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of it, and I do look forward to rereading it again and picking up on things that I hadn't seen before, because the next reread that I do will now be fully Cosmere aware when I had not been before. So I'm excited.
That's good. Griff?
I mean, I appreciated it immensely. I think that it is a very good follow-up to Oathbringer. I think that, like you said, it scales back, but it scales back appropriately. And I think that he delves into some things in regards to mental health and depression and that kind of thing and the healing of such that a lot of authors don't touch on. And I think that he did a very good job in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. The Dog and the Dragon is the best. That's what I'm going to say.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will say that there are only 2 times in the series that I consistently cry during. It is actually, no, I was wrong. There's 3. TN dying in The Way of Kings. I know it's coming every time. I cry. Oathbringer, the flashback with Renarin bringing the bottle of alcohol to Dalinar. I'm already choking up just thinking about it because it breaks my heart every time. And then the scene with Kaladin and Tien in this just wrecks me every single time. Just ugly crying wherever I am. And that's just good writing. I already know what's going to happen. I've seen it 1,000 times. I've read it 1,000 times. That scene alone is very cathartic. So,
well, there you have it. Thank you, Stormlight Memes, for coming onto our show once again. We look forward to having you back on for the Stormlight 5 theory crafting. And
we're gonna have to do that soon.
We are going to have to do it between now and December 6th, 7th, 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th.
7th.
Yeah.
9th? 7th?
Ideally quite a bit earlier
5th, 6th,
before
7th. Yeah.
Sanderson starts dropping spoiler points.
Well, he's already
He has
done
a
some
habit of
stuff
doing
once.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like he has a habit of doing that. So we might want to get on that soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you guys going to Dragonsteel this year?
I am going to do my best. Ideally, yes.
Also, ideally, yes. We are buying a house next week. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yep. It's an expensive
that's
house.
a lot.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I am going to Dragonsteel. And I'm going to see, I was on a few panels in 2022.
I need to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't go last
Sorry,
year.
you just reminded me that I need to sign up for the whole panel thing.
Right. So they have, if you're not aware of Stormlightmemes, and for those listening, you can sign up to be on a panel and or MC a panel. And I expect they'll also do their open room where you can sign up for that and host your own thing. But I think they want more people interacting because having panels of just Dragonsteel employees was not as entertaining as you'd think it would be.
Yeah.
Anyways, hopefully we make it. We're going to look at flights and stuff. I did submit us to have a booth for the Silverlight Guide to the Cosmere. We'll see if that gets accepted.
Yeah.
Hopefully it does, because I enjoyed our booth last time, and I think it did.
It was cool. It's also expensive. So
yeah, unfortunately it is. So there is that aspect of it. But I think that we've done better on the. I think we have found how to sell the stickers better than we did when we first started. So it might not be as much of an issue this time around. So
great. So bookworms, if you're still listening, thank you.
Yep.
And also email us at guidetothecosmere at gmail.com if you have any questions or ideas for future episodes. So I guess that's it. Griff?
Yeah. Until next time, don't panic, World Hoppers.
Life before death, strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.
The music you hear is Part 3, The Spirit, from Zavadilla's The Music of Elantris, produced by B-Roll Records. Available now on Apple Music, Spotify, and most music providers.
If you like what you hear and you want others to hear it as well, please leave a rate and review. It really helps us get more listeners.